Among the stars of the Kerensky cluster, in that distant dystopian home of the clans, many human behaviors were discouraged or changed in order to accommodate a new lifestyle, a new way to organize society and the people within it. But there are human moments, human responses, which simply won't change and can't change. And the Battlemech in this video is a response to one of them. A Battlemech of raw desperation was built in the 30th century, one which tries to do as much as it can to mirror the capabilities of what was lost, and questionably succeeds at that. The mech in this video is Clan Hell's Horse's invention, the infamously disastrous, or absolutely devastating, Hellbringer.
A clan-heavy Omnimech weighing in at 65 tons and built in 2926, the Hellbringer is one of the most noteworthy original clan Omnimechs from Operation Revival, otherwise known as the Clan Invasion. Its prominence and visibility during the initial campaign was such that it was one of the first documented both by the Inner Sphere at large and by the setting itself through Technical Readout 3050. The Spheroid Defenders gave it the title of Loki, naming it after a Norse pagan god. But the origins of the Hellbringer doesn't lie with the clans that operated it during the invasion, or indeed with any clan the Inner Sphere would have had contact with at least until 3070, because the Hellbringer was in fact originally conceived by Clan Hell's Horses, in extremely difficult circumstances in fact. Before we discuss this history, there is a reputation that follows the Hellbringer, which is that it was designed from the start to be heavily gunned, but poorly protected. This seems to almost mirror an American tank destroyer from the 20th century, or a battlecruiser from the same era. This would be an easy mistake to make, of course, as we as human beings like to ascribe intentions and thoughtfulness to why things are the way they are. This assumption, however, presumes a great deal as to the intentions of the original scientists and technicians who hastily put this mech together. The facts tell a very different story as to why the Hellbringer was built, and why it was built the way it was. Tokasha, a world which would change ownership several times, had a major Clan Hell's Horses presence on it on the 29th and early 30th centuries, before they were ousted from their position by Clan Ghost Bear. Unfortunately for the horses, many of their early Omnimech production models were constructed on this world, which resulted in an absolute crisis for the clan. A number of hurried and rushed Battlemechs were thrown into production by the horses in response, often scavenging parts from designs in order to have something to walk out of the factories. All of these unique Omnimechs would vanish, save for one, which was the Hellbringer. Taking components that were still manufactured from the Summoner, and then taking pieces from several older designs, or at least taking inspiration from them, such as the Warhammer and Thunderbolt, this new Omnimech began walking out of Hell's Horses controlled factories in relatively quick order, cutting corners at every opportunity and reusing these older parts. With the intention of keeping costs inherently low, the Hellbringer was conceived as a cheap Omnimech which would solve the immediate problem of losing a huge amount of their heavier designs. One of the main ways it would achieve this was as a base chassis. It would simply leave huge swathes of the mech open, resulting in it having an immense amount of pod space. This was both its strength and its curse. While its sibling designs would all vanish, the Hellbringer would survive, despite some incredible design shortcomings. And it's almost by a miracle that this even happened. First, Clan Hell's Horses, in their weakened position, would begin to gift these mechs to other clans as a means of building friendships, and avoiding conflict while in their weakened condition. This had an enormous impact on the composition of clan forces throughout the Kerensky cluster. Other clans would inherit the design, and after trials opened up the ability for others to begin manufacturing it themselves, through either conquest or acquiring its design profile, it would begin to spread rapidly throughout the clans. The reason for this was simple, because despite its general profile being almost entirely an accident of history, rather than a smart or well-engineered plan, the Hellbringer was a simple Omnimech to construct, but more importantly, it embraced an idea, a mindset among clan warriors of the time, especially during the trials of the 30th century. That mindset was offense, aggression, and attacking were always more valuable than defense. Why hide behind a shield of armored plating when you can simply destroy your opponent before you need it? This meant that for more aggressive clan warriors, the Hellbringer became a go-to Battlemech. In fact, the Hellbringer would become an almost ubiquitous design amongst all the clans during this era. It was so well suited to the role it was in, and relatively inexpensive for a second-generation Omnimech, you'd see it almost everywhere. But more than any other clan, it seemed that Clan Jade Falcon would embrace it. The Falcons, by and large in their own doctrines, valued aggression and offense more than most of their contemporaries. And in some ways even more than Clan Smoke Jaguar. The Hellbringer was a perfect, form-fitted glove for this. This particular machine would have an impact on the Falcon Tumen which overstepped even the Hellbringer's substantial presence in other organizations. Once the decision was made to rebuild the Star League by force of arms, through Operation Revival, the Hellbringer would appear in, for the clan scale, large numbers in the Inner Sphere, but especially at the forefront of Clan Jade Falcon. This diabolical death dealer earned the name of Loki, while its related design, its forebearer, the Summoner, earned the name Thor, from the armed forces of the Federated Commonwealth more specifically, meaning to convey with titles their grandeur and power. But after the shock of the initial invasion itself, the Hellbringer's shine would begin to dim, both to the Inner Sphere and to the clans. While it was extremely dangerous and heavily gunned, it simply could not destroy enough of its enemies to avoid reprisals, or to put otherwise, retaliation from its Inner Sphere counterparts. In clan society, battles were truthfully akin to a series of duels, and should you simply destroy the enemy before they took too much damage, they just won. In the Inner Sphere, where its opponents had vast armies, there were no such duels. It was just war. The once mighty Hellbringer, a war machine that appeared as if by accident, falling into clan military doctrines of its age by happenstance alone, would find fortune's turn can be most dangerous. Without armored plating to survive even against Inner Sphere heavies, these mechs would turn into coffins for their pilots as the clan invasion ground on, and its performance only became worse with time. The favored heavy of the Falcons, perhaps only just behind the Summoner, fell out of favor with all of its operators. It would become a vessel amongst the clans for Salhama mech warriors to inflict pain on their enemies before dying a miserable death. The Sea Foxes would go on to continue to manufacture the mech, selling it, and its questionable quality, to the Inner Sphere, which often craved advanced battlemechs, even ones with less than stellar qualities like the Hellbringer, resulting in these machines appearing amongst even house inventories. It is still seen on the battlefields of the Ilclan era as a result, though its quality is often questionable, and its very concept was a mistake by the people who built it. The Hellbringer has found a niche which it survives in. Simply put, it's always available to someone who needs a lot of guns, and is willing to look past its shortcomings, whether they be of the clans or the Inner Sphere. This 65-ton, 30th century clan-heavy Omnimech born of reckless abandon and pure urgency, the Hellbringer, or in the case of the Inner Sphere's identification, the Loki, is a very strange design for its era. To start with, the Hellbringer is, despite not being explicitly designed for it per se, an extremely offense-oriented machine, whether that be in the duels and challenges of the clan homeworlds during the 30th and 31st centuries, or when tackling the endless armies of the great houses and mercenaries in the 31st and 32nd centuries. It reflects this in just the sheer volume of pod space its 65-ton frame possesses, which is a more than impressive 28.5 tons, giving it more weapons volume than a Timberwolf or even a 95-ton clan Executioner. In fact, of the original lineup of 3050 technical readout clan mechs, It has the 4th highest capacity of omnipod tonnage space. This informs just about everything about the design, but it comes at a steep cost. First, the Hellbringer, built under trying circumstances and built by a relatively poor clan at the time, only has a standard internal structure rather than endosteel. This 6.5 ton frame doesn't take up any onboard critical spaces, but it does deny the Hellbringer potential weight-based assets to put into its shortcomings. This was chosen, likely, to allow for ease of manufacturing on behalf of the Hell's horses, and of course to save cost. In other words, it's one of many corners which were cut in the design. It possesses a standard gyro and cockpit as well, but mostly due to the age it was built in, rather than to any particular purpose. For cooling, it inherently has 13 clan double heat sinks, which are all residing within its engine. These will allow for it to cool 26 every turn, and it is more than acceptable for any of its more ballistics or missile-focused weapons. The Hellbringers that rely on energy systems, however, will have pilots who find that this total often falls short, barring the installation of additional omnipod heatsinks. For its onboard electronics, the Hellbringer possesses a CH-2B Alpha communications package, as well as a Verson Delta II TTS-A targeting and tracking system. None of these confer the Loki any quirks, however. In fact, it has almost no quirks at all, save for benefiting from the Searchlight trait. Almost universally, due to their lighter components in regards to their engines, and their relative durability compared to inner sphere extra-light power plants, clan-heavy Omnimechs almost always prioritize speed in their construction, and the Hellbringer is no different. Built with a 12-ton 325 XL fusion engine, the Hellbringer has a maximum speed of an impressive 86 km per hour, or 8 movement points in the tabletop game. The reason this is important is very simple. Mobility is one of, if not the, most important element of any Battlemech, as long as its other elements aren't entirely ignored. Being more mobile means being harder to hit. To go further, it means being able to go where they need to be, tactically or strategically, with greater haste. It means being able to flank your opponents, or even being able to pull out of a bad situation. In the case of the Hellbringer, it greatly benefits from every single element of this. But it all has to go wrong at some point, doesn't it? The great Achilles heel of the Loki comes in a very vital space. Because of its hurried nature, and its attempt to keep costs low, this meant that vital tonnage had to be found somewhere. It couldn't be found in the engine, and empty pod space on the mech was cheap. In fact, it was one of the reasons there was so much of it. To add to this, to save even more costs, the Hellbringer uses Forging Omni H24 armored plating, which is considered to be of standard quality, rather than the improved, high-quality Clan Ferrofibrous, which is often envied by its inner sphere counterparts. This means altogether, the Hellbringer has 8 tons of plating, giving it a very minimal 128 points of armor. To give perspective, the 45-ton Fenris, a medium mech which weighs 20 tons less and focuses on its engine, has more protection. What this means is should the Hellbringer's speed fail to protect it, it has a very minimal ability to survive very long under enemy fire, even from the relatively primitive weaponry of the inner sphere. The Hellbringer burns brightly on the battlefield, both in action and in its death throes as a result. The Hellbringer Prime is a prime example of a Battlemech that on paper is an explosive force on the tabletop, but is also badly hindered by its shortcomings, expressing the mech's traits in extreme ways. To start with its more indirect systems, it has additional defenses added to the mech in the form of A-pods, an anti-missile system, and an ECM suite, all of which attempt to make the Hellbringer more survivable. It also has an active probe to help deal with concealed targets and enemy countermeasures. The problem with this Hellbringer is that when piloting it, one feels as though they are entering one of the fiery circles of the place which it is named for. Its primary armament is a pair of Clan ER PPCs, which are devastating when used together, and can land an instant knockout blow on most standardized Battlemechs, should these deadly particle cannons hit the target's head. Next, it has 3 Clan ER medium lasers, which provide good damage and range. Backing all of this up, it has a Streak SRM-6 for crit seeking, as well as 2 machine guns for dealing with infantry and lighter targets. It all sounds great, until you realize that its Clan ER PPCs, which are really meant to support one another, instantly overheat the mech and drop its movement, because the Hellbringer needs to move to survive. So firing both of these together, and this says nothing of other weapons, puts the mech into a jeopardized position. It can't fire its medium lasers in concert with one PPC without acquiring the same results, for instance. Worse still, every turn it fires at this rate, it lowers the survivability of the mech. The Prime needs to use these weapons to justify what brought it to the field, but it doesn't have the heat capacity to really exploit the pod space it has on board. While still very dangerous, its shelf life on the battlefield, even against inner sphere adversaries, may be very limited. It is really meant for clan trials, where it vomits firepower on a single target hoping to win early. A major divergence from the Prime, the B configuration focuses almost entirely on ammunition-centric systems, and to the overall benefit of the Hellbringer. While it may not have as high of an overall damage potential, it simply won't overheat under any circumstances. First, its primary system on board is a Clan Gauss rifle with 8 rounds of ammunition, which one could argue that the design's biggest shortcoming is in fact its limited ammunition for this cannon. But there is a method to this madness. The Gauss rifle punches holes in enemy armor, which it then exploits with a devastating array of scattershot systems, because it backs this up with an LB5X, and then further backs that up at close range with twin SRM-6s enhanced with Artemis 4 fire control systems. What does this mean? It opens up targets with Gauss weaponry before it finishes them off in close with SRMs, or harasses them with an LB5. It's really that simple. It's still a fragile machine, but it won't lose its mobility due to constantly overheating. Despite its limited ammunition, in other words, it has a bit more sustainability. One of the most unique variants, first appearing after the Fedcom Civil War, is the Loki E. While it is hot running, it at least has a diverse array of weapons. It can shift between these systems with a bit more grace than some of its counterparts, and has enhanced mobility as well. First, it installs 2 ER large lasers into the right arm. It can run and fire these while still staying heat neutral, and they act as a great long-distance hole puncher. Then, it backs this up with an LRM-10 for scatter damage, as well as a very impressive HAG-20, the latter of these potentially delivering withering scatter shots. But best of all, it can jump 150 meters. It can't alpha strike safely, but it can deliver moderate damage while staying mobile, and can get out of a bad situation if it has to. Have you ever asked yourself, why am I piloting a Loki Prime? Why aren't I piloting something better? Well, does Clan Seafox have the answer for you apparently. First, this configuration attempts to mirror the Prime, while reducing its problems. It maintains its anti-missile system, but it loses its active probe and ECM, as well as its A-pods. The saved weight is then put into 4 Omnipod heatsinks, which shockingly make the variant more viable. It then possesses the same twin ER PPCs and 3 ER medium lasers. Its machine guns are replaced by anti-personnel Gauss rifles. And it has an ATM-6 replacing its original SRM-6. It can fire its PPCs turn-on-turn while running, and it can fire its medium lasers and ATMs as backups. While this is still very poorly armored, and less guarded without the ECM effectively, it doesn't matter. The T configuration has much more sustainability, and it has the ability to fight without immediately degrading itself due to heat problems. This makes it much more impressive. It is, in all probability, the best Hellbringer, even if it is still very much a flawed mech. The Hellbringer is a machine which has a series of virtues, and a crippling flaw. None of its sibling designs made it into the Clan Invasion era, however, so fate seems to have smiled upon the Loki despite itself. Even amongst the clans, it seems that just the right series of circumstances carried it through, and it has always found a niche to fill with the right people. First, it was a weapon of the desperate. Then it was a weapon of the brave. Now it has become a weapon of the old, and of gullible inner-sphere forces trying to get their hands on clan technologies. The Hellbringer even has a sequel, the Loki 2, though this mech is very much its own beast. Really though, the Hellbringer seems to be a mech that was wholly embraced by a group which indulged only their way of warfare, who had their own vision of what honor and trials by combat should look like. Upon arriving in the inner sphere, that perception of reality was shattered, and although the Hellbringer is a mediocre mech in many respects, a rarity among clan war machines, it is quite the achievement that it was able to be reinvented once more. The Hell's Horse's mech accidentally found its way to being some form of a success, though it'd be a stretch to call it good. The death of the incompetent is the death of a feeble progeny, and a testament to our glorious method.
Thank you for joining us today. Don't forget to use that free action to like and subscribe to Big Red's channel. Also, check out my own Mech Frog hobbies for more Battletech lore, painting, and even some original fiction.